This probably isn't the right way to start, but everyone keeps asking why I deleted the post. I didn't. Reddit did, twice. And before you say it, no, it wasn't for breaking rules, because there were no rules listed. At least not the kind you can see. If you're hearing this, it means I ignored the last warning. That's not drama, that's just how it works. People keep leaving comments telling me to calm down, to stop creeping myself out to touch grass. Some of those comments don't exist yet. Some of them already disappeared. I'm answering all of them anyway because I don't think silence helps anymore. I know how this sounds. Another late-night confession, another true story from someone who wants attention. That's fine. Believe that if it makes this easier. Just understand that I didn't plan to turn this into anything. I was scrolling. I saw a post. I noticed one small detail that didn't belong, and I made the mistake of pointing it out. After that, things stopped lining up. A hiker went missing, apparently, though no one can agree on when. There was a sound in the woods that people keep describing differently, except for the part where they all stop describing it at the same time. And there are rules, unwritten ones, that only come up after you've already broken them. Someone commented something under my post that I can't quote because I never got the chance to reread it. It was there, then it wasn't, like it had never loaded properly. But I saw it. I know what it said. And if you're from the right places, you already know why that matters. People who know Appalachia will already feel uncomfortable right now. Everyone else is probably still waiting for the scary part. That's okay. That's how it always starts. Casual, boring, familiar. Until you realize the normal explanation has quietly stepped out of the room. I didn't delete anything. I tried to explain that, but the messages kept coming, asking why I'd chickened out. I didn't. I stayed. I'm still here. That might be worse. Whatever this is, it doesn't feel new. It feels patient, like it's been waiting for better timing, better bait. I keep thinking I've already read this story somewhere, but that's impossible because I'm the one writing it now, and I don't remember starting it at all on purpose ever. So yeah, this started as a normal Reddit post, and I swear that's the part that scares me the most. I grew up here, which feels important to say out loud now, because people keep assuming I'm an outsider looking in. I'm not. I was born between these ridges, learned the roads before I learned multiplication, and figured out early which hollers went quiet for no reason. When I say Appalachia, I don't mean a postcard. I mean fog so thick it feels deliberate, mornings that smell like wet leaves and rusted metal, and neighbors who know your truck by sound alone. If you're from here, you already know what I mean. If you're not, you probably think I'm exaggerating. That's fine. Most people do until they visit and realize how quickly cell service drops and how long silence can stretch without feeling empty. People here are friendly in a way that doesn't ask questions. They'll wave, help you pull a car out of a ditch, then never ask why you were there in the first place. School was 10 minutes away and somehow felt farther. Churches outnumbered stoplights. Everyone knew everyone except when they didn't, and those gaps were never discussed. You learned early which houses were empty on purpose and which roads stopped being roads without warning. We called it isolation like it was a neutral thing, but it shaped how people talked, how they listened, how they avoided certain topics altogether. I grew up hearing things explained away with humor. Every weird noise had a punchline. Every bad feeling had a shrug attached to it. My grandma used to say, "That's just the mountains settlin'," whenever the house creaked at night. My uncle blamed shadows on bad eyesight, and anytime someone swore they heard their name called from the tree line, someone else would laugh and say, "Don't flatter yourself." There were rules, though nobody ever called them that. More like habits everyone shared. You don't whistle back if you hear it echo. You don't follow voices that sound familiar but feel wrong. You don't stay out past dark unless you have a reason, and even then, you make sure someone knows where you're going. Ask why, and you'd get the same answer every time. That's just how it is. I remember once asking my dad why we never cut through a certain patch of woods, even though it would have saved time. He didn't look at me when he answered, just kept tightening a bolt and said, "Because people get turned around in there." When I pointed out we'd lived there for years, he snorted and added, "Exactly." Looking back, that was the pattern. Everything strange was normal, and everything normal had edges you didn't push on. Folks joked about haints and lights in the hills, about things watching from the trees, but it was the kind of joking that stopped too fast if you laughed too hard. The mountains were treated like family, loved, respected, and never fully trusted. By the time I was old enough to notice the fear underneath the jokes, I'd already learned not to point at it directly. You survive here by blending in, by pretending not to notice what notices you first. That's what people miss when they romanticize this place. It isn't fear, it's familiarity. You grow up knowing the land doesn't belong to you, no matter how long your people have lived on it. You learn to listen more than you speak. You learn that some questions don't get answers, just silence. So when I saw that post on Reddit asking innocent questions about trails and local legends, I laughed out loud. It read like every fake story I'd ever seen from someone chasing upvotes, stitching together cliches they didn't understand. I almost kept scrolling. Almost. Because buried in all the nonsense was one small thing, a word choice, a description no outsider ever uses. It wasn't scary, it wasn't dramatic, it was wrong in a quiet, specific way. That's why I laughed when I saw the post on Reddit, because it sounded fake, but it used the wrong words in the worst possible way imaginable ever to begin with. I found the post late, which already put it in the danger zone. Anyone who uses Reddit knows the hours between midnight and 2 a.m. are when fake stories get posted and real ones slip through unnoticed. It was in a small hiking subreddit, not even region-specific, just someone asking about quiet trails in the Appalachian Range. At first glance, it was boring. No dramatic title, no all-caps warning, no obvious bait. The op said they were new to the area, moving through for work, looking for places to hike that felt old and empty. That phrase should have stood out more than it did. People describe trails a lot of ways: scenic, peaceful, secluded. Nobody from here says old unless they're talking about buildings or grudges. Still, the comments rolled in like you'd expect. Jokes about Bigfoot, someone recommending a popular state park, a few eye-roll emojis. I kept scrolling because that's what you do. Then I hit the part that made my stomach tighten. The op mentioned hearing a call echo back wrong while scouting and asked if that was normal for the older paths. No one unfamiliar with the area phrases it like that, they just don't. That's when the tone shifted. One comment popped up from a username made of random letters, the kind you assume is a throwaway. It said, "Don't ask that here." That was it. No explanation, no emoji. When I refreshed, it was gone. I'm not exaggerating when I say it couldn't have been up more than 10 seconds. I know because I hovered over it, debating whether to reply, and then the page jumped. Other people noticed too. Someone commented, "Why'd you delete that?" even though no deletion tag showed. More comments followed, some joking, some tense. One person said hikers go missing every year and to relax. Another replied that they shouldn't joke about that. A moderator chimed in with a vague reminder about keeping things on topic. Then those comments vanished too. Here's the thing that really stuck with me. The op replied once, thanking someone for a suggestion and adding, "I don't think that's the right kind of old." That sentence used a name, not directly but close enough that my brain filled it in. A name I hadn't heard since I was a kid, and even then only once. I sat there staring at the screen, suddenly very aware that this wasn't just an internet story anymore. People were treating it like a joke because that's what distance allows. You can laugh at things that can't reach you, except this one felt like it already knew where it was. I checked the op's profile. Brand new, no history, no comments anywhere else. By the time I refreshed again, the entire thread was locked, not removed, locked. Like someone had decided it shouldn't go any further but didn't want to explain why. That's when I realized I wasn't just reading anymore, I was involved. I could have closed the app. I could have forgotten it like everyone else clearly wanted to. Instead, I typed a reply, careful with my words, pretending curiosity was harmless. I hit post before I could rethink it, before the warning feeling fully formed. The screen refreshed, my comment appeared, and somewhere between that moment and this one, something shifted. I know some of you reading this are already rolling your eyes, cataloging the coincidences, preparing explanations. I would have done the same a week ago. That's the safety of a screen. It lets you believe nothing follows you once you scroll away. But I couldn't shake the sense that I'd crossed an invisible line, one drawn long before Reddit existed, and that acknowledging it, even anonymously, counted as stepping over. My phone buzzed almost immediately with a notification that vanished before I could open it. No record, no banner, just the afterimage of it in my head. That was when the familiar comfort of distance broke. This wasn't content anymore, it felt like correspondence. I should have stopped there, closed the app, slept, pretended it was nothing. Instead, I stared at my own words on the screen, waiting for something I didn't want to happen and couldn't explain. And in that pause, I felt seen for the first time ever again. I replied, "That's the mistake. That's always the mistake." After I replied, the DMs started almost immediately. At first, they felt like noise, jokes, sarcasm, people playing along like this was some kind of ARG I'd accidentally wandered into. One person asked if I was trying to write a creepypasta. Another told me I should pitch it to Netflix. I almost relaxed, almost convinced myself I'd read too much into it. Then the tone shifted. The first serious message didn't have a greeting, no username I recognized, just a block of text that read, "You need to delete your comment." I stared at it, waiting for more. When nothing came, I replied with a simple "Why?" The response arrived less than a minute later. "Because you just invited it." That was it. No explanation, no emoji, no follow-up. I checked their profile, years old. No posts, no comments, like it existed only to send that warning. After that, the messages got stranger. Some people claimed they were from nearby towns. Others wouldn't say where they were from at all. One sent a voice note, whispering like someone might overhear them through their phone. "Look, I don't know what you think you're doing," he said, breath shaky, "but you don't ask about that stuff in public, ever." I asked what that stuff meant. He didn't answer. He just sent another message a few minutes later telling me to delete everything and stop replying. Notice how nobody actually explains what it is. That's what stood out to me. Every message danced around the same empty center. One person said it was more like a pattern than a thing. Another insisted it was just old superstition blown out of proportion. Someone else flat out told me I was putting people at risk just by engaging. A woman messaged me saying her uncle went missing years ago after talking too much online. When I asked where, she unsent the message and replaced it with, "Forget I said that." A different user laughed it off, saying folks around here like to scare outsiders, then immediately followed up with, "But seriously, delete it." The contradictions piled up fast. Some told me to stop because it would notice. Others said it already had. A few claimed nothing bad would happen as long as I didn't say certain words. None of them agreed on which words those were. What they did agree on was silence. Take it down. Don't dig. Don't reply to anyone else. This isn't how you learn about it. I felt caught between two instincts that didn't belong together. The first was familiarity, that sense of community I'd grown up with, where people warned you because they cared. The second was fear so sharp it made the concern feel rehearsed, like everyone had learned the same lines without knowing why. I typed out a dozen replies and deleted all of them. I refreshed the thread and watched more comments vanish. Usernames I just read blinked out of existence. The post itself stayed up, quiet and locked, like it was being preserved rather than removed. One final message came in just before I put my phone down. Same user as before, same blunt tone. "Last chance, delete it. This isn't curiosity, this is bait." My hands were shaking, not from panic, but from recognition. I'd felt this pressure before, growing up, right before someone told you to stop asking questions. I stared at my comment for a long time, at the harmless words I'd chosen so carefully, at the idea that knowledge itself could be dangerous. I told myself fear survives on ignorance, not understanding. I told myself staying quiet had never fixed anything. I didn't delete it. I told myself knowledge isn't dangerous. Appalachia disagrees. Nothing happened the next morning, and that was the problem. I woke up, made coffee, checked my phone, and everything looked exactly the same as it always had. No missing time, no strange marks, no messages waiting. The quiet felt intentional, like a held breath. I kept expecting something obvious, something dramatic, because that's how stories work. Real life didn't give me that courtesy. I drove into town to run errands I didn't actually need, just to prove movement still mattered. The gas station clerk nodded the way he always did. The radio crackled between stations. Outside, the mountains sat where they'd been my whole life, dark and unmoving, like props that hadn't been told the scene was over. I told myself the warnings were just nerves, adrenaline leaking into imagination. On the way back, I took the long road without thinking about it. I'd driven it 1,000 times. Trees leaned close, branches knitting overhead. That was when I noticed the trail marker. It was subtle. Just a small reflective tag nailed to a trunk, the kind hikers used to keep from wandering too far. It had been there yesterday, I was sure of it. Today it faced the wrong direction. I pulled over and stared at it longer than made sense. The forest was quiet in a way that felt arranged. No birds, no wind. Even my engine sounded wrong when I shut it off, like the noise lingered too long after stopping. I told myself markers get twisted. People mess with things. That explanation felt thin, but it was something. As I stood there listening, I realized I was waiting, not for danger, for confirmation. That's when the sound came, faint and distant. Not a voice exactly, more like the shape of one. A call that rose and fell like it was testing the air. It didn't echo the way it should have. It behaved like it knew I was listening. I didn't respond. I remembered that much. You don't answer. You don't announce yourself. You leave. I got back in the truck without slamming the door and drove home slower than necessary, watching the tree line in the mirrors. Nothing followed. That was worse. The rest of the day crawled. Normal noises felt intrusive. Every silence felt heavy. I kept noticing things I'd ignored my entire life, how paths subtly bend away from certain spots, how fences stop short of tree lines, how people lower their voices without realizing it. None of it was new. I was just finally looking. By evening, I couldn't stand it anymore. The unanswered questions, the deliberate quiet, the sense that something had shifted without leaving footprints. I sat on my bed with my phone, telling myself I was overreacting, that the internet had primed me to see patterns where none existed. I tried distracting myself the way people do when they don't want to think. Dishes, laundry, mindless scrolling through apps that suddenly felt too loud. Every task ended with me pausing, listening for something I couldn't define. The house felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in while I wasn't paying attention. Even familiar creaks sounded rehearsed, repeating at the wrong moments. I caught myself avoiding windows as the light faded, not because I expected to see anything, but because I didn't want to confirm that I wouldn't. That realization bothered me more than fear ever had. It suggested anticipation, not panic. Somewhere in the back of my mind was the certainty that whatever I'd brushed against online didn't need theatrics. It didn't rush, it adjusted. Dinner went cold on the counter. I sat at the table, phone face down, feeling watched without direction. Not followed, not hunted. Observed the way you watch an experiment after variables change. I replayed every message, every warning, every half-answer I'd received. They weren't trying to scare me, they were trying to limit exposure. By the time night settled, the quiet felt earned, like a reward for patience. That's when I understood the smallest rule of all: you notice after you're noticed. And once that happens, pretending nothing changed only gives it room. That's when I checked Reddit again and saw the comment history. I didn't use anything fancy at first, just the usual tricks everyone pretends not to know about. Cached pages, archive sites, third-party tools Reddit insists don't exist but quietly rely on. It felt wrong even trying, like picking at a scab everyone agreed should heal untouched. Still, curiosity had already done its damage. I told myself I was just looking for context, for proof that I hadn't imagined the warnings. The first recovered comment was short and unfinished, like the person posting it had stopped mid-thought. It talked about patterns, not creatures, about disappearances that weren't random but spaced out as if something needed time between events. The username was gone, not deleted, wiped. No trace of activity anywhere else. That alone was unsettling. Accounts don't just evaporate without effort. As I dug deeper, a pattern emerged that made my stomach drop. Every comment that tried to explain too much vanished within minutes. Not hours, minutes. The vague ones stayed. The jokes stayed. The ones that treated it like folklore stayed. Anything that described rules, outcomes, or names disappeared like it had never loaded. The rules weren't written. They were enforced. One archived comment mentioned a family whose last name no longer showed up in county records, despite owning land for generations. Another referenced a search party that kept finding the same boot, no matter where they looked. Someone else described remembering a classmate everyone swore never existed. The replies underneath those comments were missing entirely, like entire conversations had been vacuumed out of history. I kept noticing the same thing. Nobody agreed on what it was, but they all described the same effects. Silence where memories should be, gaps that felt intentional, stories that ended abruptly as if someone had leaned over and closed the book mid-sentence. That's when it clicked that this wasn't one entity stalking the woods. It was a process, a system that corrected attention. What scared me most was realizing how clean it all looked from the outside. Reddit moderation, locked threads, deleted comments, perfect tools for containment without anyone needing to coordinate. People assumed bans or rule violations. Algorithms did the rest. No alarms, no explanations, just absence. I started to wonder how many times I'd scrolled past the edge of something and never noticed. There were references to earlier posts buried years back, all following the same arc. Curious outsider, locals warning without explaining. Silence. In a few cases, the ops stopped posting entirely. In others, their account remained active but never mentioned the topic again, like something had negotiated terms, like speaking once was allowed but continuing came with consequences. I felt like I was trespassing, reading things meant to stay lost. My hands shook as I scrolled, not from fear alone, but from the sense that this knowledge wasn't passive. It demanded acknowledgement, participation. Even now, I hesitate to repeat what I read because repetition feels like propagation, like helping something remember itself. That's when I noticed timestamps lining up with local incidents I half remembered from childhood. Sirens at night, search helicopters, adults whispering then laughing too loud when kids asked questions. The archives didn't explain everything, but they explained enough. Enough to make denial impossible. Enough to make silence look deliberate, not ignorant. I leaned back from the screen, heart racing, realizing this wasn't the first time someone had posted about it. It was just the first time someone survived long enough to reply. I remember the first time I heard the story, but nobody called it a story back then. It was just something adults stopped talking about when kids walked into the room. A man went missing officially, though that word never felt right. Missing implies misplaced. This felt removed. The papers said he wandered off a trail during hunting season, got turned around, succumbed to exposure. Everyone nodded at that explanation like it was a prayer you repeat until it works. No one asked questions because questions implied responsibility, and responsibility was heavier than silence for everyone involved back then locally. I was young enough that I didn't understand why my dad went quiet whenever the name came up. I only knew it made the room colder. At school, kids repeated different versions, each one sounding rehearsed. Some said the man ran off, some said he owed money. One kid joked he was abducted by aliens, and the teacher laughed too hard before changing the subject. Humor was easier than grief, and denial was easier than admitting fear. That pattern followed me home, where adults exchanged looks instead of details and pretended forgetting was kindness to protect children like us then. Years later, I read the official report online, and it was painfully neat. Timelines aligned, weather explained everything. Search efforts were heroic and thorough. The report ended with a conclusion that felt final, like a door closing. But locals tell it differently, always starting in the middle. They talk about the dogs refusing a scent, about radios going quiet, about how the woods felt wrong that week. Every version leaves something out on purpose. Nobody agrees on what happened. They only agree on what not to say. That shared silence says more than facts could, especially when repeated across generations. When I think back now, certain details glow sharper. I remember a volunteer searcher telling my mom, joking, that the forest doesn't like being mapped. Everyone laughed. Later, the same man stopped coming around town. Someone said he moved. Someone else said he drank too much. Both explanations felt convenient. As a kid, I accepted them. As an adult, I hear the punchlines as warnings delivered sideways. Dark humor covered wounds nobody wanted to examine too closely. It was safer to laugh than remember names that slowly disappeared from conversations and records without leaving obvious gaps until someone noticed later. The story kept resurfacing at odd moments, usually late, usually whispered. Around campfires, someone would start it, then trail off, letting the fire finish the thought. Others corrected details without correcting the ending. Nobody wanted to be the one who said too much. I didn't notice the pattern until adulthood. The moment curiosity crossed into specifics, the conversation died. Like something listening disliked clarity. It felt less like superstition and more like enforcement. The kind you don't see until you test it. Memory itself seemed edited, trimmed to avoid edges that might cut back if handled wrong by anyone curious. Reading those archived comments dragged all of that back into focus. The missing man wasn't unique. He was an example, a reminder reinforced whenever attention lingered too long. That's why details blurred. That's why names faded. The system didn't need everyone gone, just quiet. I felt sick realizing how many times I'd benefited from forgetting, how often comfort came from not pushing. Trauma disguised itself as tradition, passed down with a smile. It kept the peace and fed whatever enforced the rules. I wondered how many stories I'd helped erase just by laughing along and moving on without questions asked. By the time I finished piecing it together, the story felt less like history and more like a warning label. Don't linger, don't name things, don't invite focus. As a kid, I'd learned those lessons instinctively. As an adult, I'd forgotten them in favor of explanation. That arrogance felt dangerous now. The missing man wasn't the horror. The agreement to forget him was. That realization settled heavy in my chest. It explained why my post felt like a violation. I tugged at something meant to stay buried, and the response was immediate, even before consequences appeared fully or visibly. I was still staring at the screen when the notification appeared under my original post. New comment, no username I recognized. My breath caught before I clicked it because some part of me already knew. The comment wasn't long, it wasn't threatening, it didn't explain anything. It simply used my real name, spelled correctly, and asked if I remembered him. My hands went cold as childhood rushed back. I felt the room tilt, certainty replacing doubt. This was no longer abstract or distant. It was personal now and immediate. And then someone commented under my post using my real name. I noticed the change before anything obvious happened. That's the part I keep coming back to. It didn't announce itself, it adjusted. The comment with my name stayed up longer than the others, almost like it wanted me to sit with it. I didn't reply, I didn't need to. My phone buzzed anyway, not with a message, but with the subtle vibration of a notification that vanished when I looked. The absence felt intentional, like a tap on the glass. If you felt watched since this started, I'm sorry. I need you to understand something before this goes any further. This isn't about belief. You don't have to be convinced. You don't even have to be scared. It doesn't need that. It only needs acknowledgement, and that's easier to give than people realize. After the comment appeared, things around me began to echo themselves. Not repeat exactly, close enough to feel wrong. A knock on my door that sounded like my dad's old rhythm even though he hasn't lived here in years. A voice from a passing car that used my nickname, the one only my sister used when we were kids. Each time my body reacted before my brain could catch up. I didn't answer. I didn't look too long. I remembered the rules without remembering where I learned them. It started mimicking things tied to attention. Notifications, familiar phrases, even silence stretched and shaped to pull focus. When I opened Reddit, my feed refreshed on its own, landing me back on my post. New comments appeared and disappeared faster now, like the system was testing thresholds. How much could be shown before it triggered correction? How much could be hidden without raising alarms? I realized then that reading counted, watching counted, listening definitely counted. Participation wasn't active, it was perceptual. You didn't have to speak to engage, you just had to notice. That's why stories mattered, that's why they were controlled. Every pair of eyes added weight, every curious scroll tightened something unseen. I started addressing the audience in my head before I did it here. Wondering how many of you were leaning in right now, feeling that prickle between your shoulders. Wondering if you'd felt relief when I explained things or disappointment when I didn't. That reaction mattered. It fed the pattern. I hated that realization because it meant this wasn't just happening to me anymore. The mimicry escalated subtly. A notification sound that matched the one from my old phone. A memory surfacing unprompted, vivid, and specific like it had been selected. It wasn't copying me. It was copying what I responded to. Attention shaped it. Silence starved it. That was the closest thing to a rule I could identify, and even that felt dangerous to articulate. I tried stepping away, leaving my phone in another room, sitting with the quiet. The quiet followed, not noise, presence, like something waiting for me to acknowledge it again. The illusion of safety shattered then. Distance didn't matter. Platforms didn't matter. This wasn't contained by screens. Screens just made it efficient. What scared me most was how ordinary it all felt once it settled in. Fear faded into routine. I started anticipating the echoes, bracing for them, and that anticipation itself felt like communication. That's the trap. You don't realize you're responding because nothing is asking a clear question. It just waits for your attention to wander in the right direction. That's why denial works for so long. It feels like freedom when it's actually compliance. If you're still reading, you're doing what I did. You're telling yourself awareness equals control. I need you to know that assumption is the most dangerous part of this. The system doesn't punish curiosity, it uses it. It learns what pulls you closer and reshapes itself around that gravity. By the time you notice, it already knows you well enough to sound familiar. There's one last thing I haven't told you, because I didn't understand it until now. I'm not the first person to stumble into this loop. The more I looked, the more it became clear that the story wasn't linear. It wasn't a single haunting or a single missing person. It was a cycle repeated like a song with the chorus removed. A post appears, someone asks an innocent question, locals warn, the curious respond, comments vanish. The thread locks, and then after enough time passes, the whole thing resets, as if the internet itself has a memory span that can be erased and rewritten. The pattern is consistent enough that it feels deliberate. You can see it in the way the replies change tone as the thread ages. At first there are jokes, because that's how people cope when they don't know what to fear. Then the warnings arrive, short and sharp, like a hand on your shoulder. Then the silence. The silence is the real signal. That's when the system starts to work. It doesn't need violence or spectacle. It just needs the conversation to stop. It needs you to forget. And this is the part that makes me sick. It works every time. People get scared, they back away, and the thread fades. It disappears into the same dark archive where the rest of the warnings live. The story becomes a rumor. The rumor becomes a joke. The joke becomes a memory you can't quite place. And then the cycle starts again because someone else is always curious enough to ask the wrong question in the wrong place. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm making this into a myth because I'm afraid, that I'm exaggerating because I want attention, that I'm projecting my own fears onto coincidence. That's what I would think if I were reading this from the outside. That's the safety of distance. The internet gives you permission to dismiss things you don't want to face. But the pattern doesn't care about your skepticism. It doesn't need you to believe. It just needs you to notice and then to stop noticing. That's how it survives. That's why the warnings never explain anything. If they did, you'd keep thinking about it, you'd keep asking, you'd keep searching, and that would break the loop. This post will disappear too, not because someone reports it, not because a moderator removes it, but because the cycle has a way of correcting itself, unless enough people remember. That's the only weak point in the system, collective memory. If the story stays alive, the silence can't fully take hold. So I'm asking you carefully, if you've seen anything like this, threads that vanish, comments that don't stay, people who suddenly stop posting after mentioning the woods, tell me. Not for attention, not for entertainment, for survival. Because if you're reading this and you recognize the pattern, then you're already inside it. And if you're from Appalachia, you already know what I mean. You know the way people talk around certain topics, the way they change the subject, the way they laugh too loud. You know the names that disappear from conversations. You know the places nobody goes anymore, not because they're dangerous, but because they're watched. This isn't a single case file. It's a system, and I'm only one small part of it. If you've got a story, share it. If you've got a theory, say it. But do it with caution, because the moment you acknowledge the pattern, you become part of the pattern. The cycle doesn't stop because you're afraid. It stops when you refuse to let the story die. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to remember you don't understand. Memory is the light it can't erase. So if you're from Appalachia, you already know what comes next. If you've made it this far, I don't know whether to thank you or warn you. I'm writing this with the same hands that typed my first comment on that thread, the same hands that shook when the notifications started behaving like they knew my habits. I keep telling myself I'm just trying to document it, to get it out of my head before it turns me into one of those quiet people who never talks about anything anymore. But I can feel the shape of it in my mind, like a shadow that's learned the outline of my life. I want to be clear about something because I don't want anyone else to make the same mistake I did. This isn't a ghost story. It isn't a monster you can fight. It isn't a legend you can debunk. It's a mechanism. It adapts. It doesn't need belief. It doesn't even need fear. It only needs attention, and then it uses that attention to become familiar enough to slip into your life. I've been trying to decide what to do with this post. I've thought about deleting it, but I'm not sure that's even possible. The first time I tried, I couldn't. The delete button didn't respond. It was like the page itself refused. The second time the button worked, but the post reappeared when I refreshed. It wasn't gone. It was just delayed, like the system was testing me, seeing how badly I wanted it to vanish. If this helped you understand something, forget it. If it didn't, it already understands you. That's the part that feels cruel. Knowledge isn't protection here. It's a kind of exposure. Once you know, you become part of the equation. You become a node in the system. The more you think about it, the more you feed it. I keep thinking back to the first line of this whole mess. Everyone keeps asking why I deleted the post. I didn't. Reddit did twice. That sentence used to feel like a clever hook. Now it feels like a warning I didn't recognize as one. Because the truth is, I don't think I deleted anything at all. I think I was edited. I think the story was rewritten around me, and I only noticed because I still had the memory of the original version. I'm not sure what's real anymore. I can't tell if the warnings were genuine or if they were planted to keep me from seeing how much I already knew. I can't tell if the missing people are gone or if their names are just being removed from the world, one conversation at a time. I can't tell if I'm being watched or if I'm being used as a reminder. The worst part is the quiet, the way the silence feels like a hand on your shoulder, guiding you away from the truth. I used to think silence was absence. Now I know it can be a presence, it can be a decision. It can be a boundary. If you're reading this and you feel that pull, the urge to comment, to share, to ask questions, do it carefully. Some of you might be survivors. Some of you might be witnesses. Some of you might be the kind of people who don't belong here at all, who stumbled in by accident and now can't find the exit. If you have a story, if you've seen something that doesn't fit, if you've ever felt a name disappear from a conversation or a memory slip away like a bad dream, leave a comment. Not for attention, for evidence, for the fragile hope that if enough people remember, the cycle can't reset so cleanly. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if the system can be broken by awareness, but I do know this: it's already aware of you. It doesn't need to be invited, it just needs to be noticed. So I'm leaving this here while I still can, while the words still exist in the same order I wrote them, while the post still stands, while you still have the chance to read it before the silence returns and the thread locks again like a door closing behind you without you ever hearing it. If this disappears, don't assume it was removed, don't assume it was lost, assume it did what it always does. It corrected itself.